This is Big Ideas from the ABC.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for organising this, especially Melinda. Thank you, and Collective Shout. I won't forget this trip. I have to tell you, this has been an interesting trip to your country. You have a very well-oiled pro-porn lobby in this country that has managed to really get itself together. It's really got its act together and come after me in a way that I've not seen in many countries. So you should know that. This is really interesting. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to have more time, and I haven't got people kind of knocking me on the head as I'm trying to talk. So what I'm going to be doing is giving a more extensive analysis of the society that we live in, and specifically the world that young women and young men now have to grow up in. Because for most of you, this is not the world that you grew up in. I mean, you know, we heard all this hideous, ridiculous talk about pornography being women in frilly dresses having sex. Okay, this is what was being talked about at the Sydney Writers' Festival, as if that's the reality of the porn industry. So what I'm actually going to do today is take you through the world of pornography, and especially the world of the pop culture that many of our kids grow up in. So the first thing to think about, which is different to most of you when I'm looking at your ages, is most of you in this room grew up in a print-based culture. You grew up when the dominant form of communication was the printed word. And as a society, we developed some immunization to the seduction of the eloquence of the printed word. You could engage with the truth or falsity of the printed word. There is no such immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the image. And this is the world we live in now, an image-based culture. And it is a completely different way of understanding messages. It is a completely different way of processing communication. And what's happening in many colleges, for any of you here teach in colleges or in high schools, and you can see often that the writing skills of our students are going down. This doesn't mean that they're stupid. What it means is we bring them into a print-based world of school and colleges, yet they are image-based babies. And there is a clash between the image that they constantly consume and the print that we require of them in a college-based setting or a school-based setting. So first, let's talk about how images work. And we often talk about stereotypes. The issue around stereotypes is not whether it's true or false. That's not the power of a stereotype. The power of a stereotype is whether it claims to tell the truth. And the more you see that image over and over again, the more it claims truth. So, for example, this is not true. This is a hideous representation of masculinity and an equally hideous image of femininity. It doesn't matter that neither one exists. Because when I'm in my classes and I'm showing students this kind of image, and I'm saying, you know, she doesn't exist, she's airbrushed, there's nothing real about her, and how many of you are still comparing yourself to her? And every hand goes up. And am I right with all the women in the room? Okay? And I can tell you till I'm blue in the face, they don't exist. It doesn't matter. You're looking at that image and you're thinking, I'm a fat cow and I need to go on a diet. Right? Is that the kind of way most of us engage with images? So just think about the power of this image. And so I want to kind of walk you through the images and what they say about masculinity and femininity. And these are just a collection of images from Cosmopolitan, Vanity Fair, Sports Illustrated. And what you notice is the first thing is that the image is dominated by females. Young, toned, thin, airbrushed, usually white females. And this is a hypersexualized image of femininity. And let's talk about how images work. In media theory, there is a concept called reader inscribed in the text. And what that means is that every image has a reader in mind. The producer is thinking who is going to be the reader. And so when you look at this image, who is she speaking to? Who is the recipient of that look? And before you answer, do you think she's saying to her mother, let's go for a cup of coffee after the photo shoot? Who's she speaking to? Men. And what's she saying? Fuck me. Yeah? I like to call it succinctly the fuck me look. Now, what's interesting, when I do this in classes, and I say to the students, this is the fuck me look, and I say, can all of you do it? And they all say, yes, of course. They all know instantly. And I bet every woman in this room knows exactly what to do the fuck me look. Right? It's not like it's something we don't know. So I have a student come up in the class to do this look. And then, what's interesting, I have a male student come up to do it. And of course, everyone laughs because it's funny. Because for masculinity to look hot, it's not fuck me. What is it? It's fuck you. Right? And so here we have encoded into masculinity and femininity power inequality. That to be hot as a female is fuck me, and to be hot as a male is fuck you. Now, the problem with that is put that within the context of a patriarchal society. Put it in the context of a porn culture. Put some alcohol in the room, and what have you got? Okay, we basically set up our young women. And then, of course, should there be a perpetrator and a victim, then we blame her for looking like, quote, a slut. Which, of course, then is even a double whammy, because now women are going on slut walks, so God knows where all this is going to play out in the court systems when they think about this, which I'm going to talk about as we go on here. Because remember, it might be about women empowering themselves in a slut walk, but you have to put that in the context of a society where women do not make the rules. And what we need to do is change the rules, not play by the rules. And this is what is happening at the moment, is women are learning to play by the rules of patriarchy. They are learning how to capitulate rather than fight back, which again I'm going to talk about as I move on into this. Now, here's an interesting image about Sports Illustrated. When I first brought this home, my husband, who's sitting over there, who actually is my partner of 30 years and makes all of this possible in many ways, he said he looked at this, and he's not very image literate, my husband, and he said, why are they using the same woman 8 times? Right, sorry, David. Well, the truth is, he was wrong, but in a way, he was right. Because this is the truth of women in media, is they are stripped of a past, a present, a future, an identity, a name, goals, aspirations, wants, desires. They're stripped of all of those. And what's delivered up to us in the media are body parts of women who are indeed interchangeable. As long as you've got a flat stomach and toned thighs and rounded breasts and of a certain age and usually white, you are the same as the next. You're all the same. And what does that mean? It means that is what objectification is about. When women are stripped of an identity and you are told that this is all that matters. And again, I can't say just how important this is in a world today where my students from very early age think about how they look. In fact, there's this concept called the hurried child now in childhood studies, saying that little girls especially are having much limited childhood because they're beginning to take on the norms of the culture and worried about what they look like. I have students who do student teaching in schools, and they talk about 8-year-olds not eating their lunch because they're scared of putting weight on. So what does this mean in our culture today? And you know what? Even if you are a woman and you have a sort of reputation and a name, so take this. This is last month's Vanity Fair before the Oscars. Now, arguably, these women are at the peak of their career. They're all up for an Oscar for either, for acting. Now, what do you notice about them all? They're unclothed, right? And what do you notice about the men? So it doesn't matter. Even if you are at the peak of your career, you are still delivered to men in the same way. And it is no accident that in prisons, the first thing prisoners have to do is strip naked. Because to be naked in the presence of somebody clothed is to be in a vulnerable situation. And I want to keep pressing this point that female sexuality is defined as vulnerable in a patriarchal society. And indeed, this vulnerability of women unclothed in the gaze of clothed men is extremely powerful. And I recently had a conversation with somebody who was saying to me, a filmmaker, about how he said, in Europe, everyone's so much more open about sex. Because you see these images everywhere. And he was saying this is great about, you see billboards about sex. And I said, how many penises do you see hanging out? And of course, when he talks about sex, he means women's bodies. Right? And this is so, if in these countries in Europe that's so great and open about sex, why no penises? Right? Why only are women's bodies cheap enough to be plastered everywhere? And that's the reality of pop culture in the West. Now, I want to sort of explain the life of an average adolescent girl and young woman. And to do that, I'm going to talk about what it means to grow up in a society where Lindsay Lohan and Britney Spears and Paris Hilton are the main role models. And to do that, let me talk about what I was actually going to call my book. I don't know if you know this, but when you publish a book, you don't get to decide the title. And I had a great title, I thought. My original title for this was going to be Stepford Sluts. Maybe that's great? I do, but no, the publisher said no. So, let me explain why I was going to call it that. So this was the argument. The first chapter was going to be, look, in 2006 they remade the Stepford Wives movie. You all know what the Stepford Wives is, yeah, this roboticized, technologized, industrialized, commodified, perfect woman. So in 2006 they remade the movie, and of course nobody went to see it. It was a complete bomb. And my argument in my first chapter was, of course it was a disaster. Because whoever conceived that in 2006 the perfect woman is on her hands and knees waxing the kitchen floor? It is ludicrous, because today the perfect woman is still on her hands and knees. But she is the one waxed, as in full bikini wax, and she ain't cleaning any kitchen floors in that position. So what's happened is the idealised Stepford wife image that drove our mothers and grandmothers insane has now morphed into the idealised Stepford slut image, which is driving our young girls insane. The only difference is now, in some quarters, we argue that this is a form of empowerment, that to be controlled by an image that is made from an industry, a capitalist industry, is somehow about the empowerment of young women and not about the maximisation of profit. And you don't need to be a Marxist to not trust corporations, okay? You just need to have a little bit of insight into how corporations work. So I want to talk about what this means in our culture, because what we say to young girls today is we say, you know what, you have to look like a slut, you have to dress like a slut, you have to act like a slut, but don't get labelled a slut. Because if you get labelled a slut, your life will change. But the problem is, you see, that dividing line between non-slut and slut is very thin, and you don't decide if you cross it. An ex-boyfriend decides on Facebook if you're a slut. An ex-girlfriend decides. Somebody else decides. And let me tell you what the research shows. And this is what I have been trying to put out over and over again about. You all know what the slut walk is. Are you all familiar with this? This is happening in Melbourne next week. Let me tell you what the research is showing. Girls who are defined as sluts have symptoms very similar to rape victims. They develop post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that include increased depression, anxiety, suicidality, alcoholism, drug abuse, self-mutilation, low self-esteem, everything in fact that we know that women who are raped develop. So in a way, to be defined as a slut is a collective rape of your identity. That's what's going on in our culture. And it is just boggles the mind that we are telling our young girls that the way to be empowered is to be a slut and to take that. You see, we cannot reclaim slut because it was never ours in the first place. We never came up with this as women. That is a term that is drenched in patriarchal ideology about women's sexuality, and it is unsalvageable. I am Jewish. I am not going on any kike walk soon, right? That word is beyond redemption. Now, it is not the same. Some words can be redeemed, as the queer community has tried to redeem that term. There are some words that within a different context can be, and that doesn't mean all words can be redeemable. And slut, in a patriarchal culture, in a society where the pornographers keep saying to men and boys, women are sluts, 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 you are completely going to lose that battle. And so when we talk about this, so let's talk about Paris Hilton, who is kind of the iconic slut of the West, the most photographed woman in the world. You know what? She can afford to wear the badge, the label of slut with pride, because her millions act as an upmarket cleansing cream. She can get away with it. Put that slut label on a working class girl, put it on a young adolescent girl, and she cannot maneuver her way around that label in a way that Paris Hilton can. And what's interesting, Paris Hilton, the story of Paris Hilton is really the story of a porn culture. Here she was, a young woman, dating this guy who was married at the time and 13 years her senior. He then took a sex tape of her, by the way, and often it looks like it was without her knowledge, and she tried to stop him selling it. And it came out, and it was the top-selling porn movie of the year. And she couldn't do anything about it, and she got labelled a slut. Now, she did make it work for her. There's no question. God knows what her psyche looks like and how she feels about it, but in terms of the popular image, it worked for her. But to suggest that we can take what happened to Paris Hilton and make it work for the average teenage girl is again to miss the context of the world that these girls live in. Do you all know who this is? Anna Nicole Smith. Do you have Anna Nicole Smith? Okay, let me tell you about Anna Nicole Smith, because this woman breaks my heart. And she breaks my heart in a lot of ways. And the first thing is, her son died at 23. Right, and I remember when she died a few months after, people, oh, what's ex-porn star? What did she die of? And they wanted to do an autopsy. And I wanted to say, you know what? Don't do an autopsy. I know what she died of. She died of a broken heart. She buried her son. And I'll tell you why it really stuck with me, because her son, when he died, was the same age as my son. And if anyone's got kids, when a kid dies the age of your kid, it sticks with you. And I thought about what her kid's life must have been like. Because I said to my son once, who literally, when he went away to college, he made me sign in blood a contract that I would never lecture in the college he went to, right? That's literally. Now, and then I said to him one day, I said to him, why do you never come and hear me speak? And you know what he said? He said, you know what, Mum? You really don't want the word porn and the word mum in the same sentence. And he was right. And then I thought, if he feels that about me as